Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where the crucial EU summit is now underway, with just 8 days to the set date for the UK's departure from the EU. Theresa May arrived here at lunchtime to make a direct plea to EU leaders, asking to postpone Brexit for 3 months. Well, within the past hour, a set of draft conclusions has been published, which offers an extension, we think, to the 22nd of May, not the 3 months that the Prime Minister wanted. And it's still conditional on the deal being passed by MPs next week. Earlier, Mrs May appealed again to the House of Commons to help her deliver Brexit, saying that the need for this delay was a matter of great personal regret. Labour's Jeremy Corbyn has also been here in Brussels today for his own Brexit talks with leaders. Let's start with this report by our political editor, Laura Kunsberg.
This could have been her last lap of this red carpet, a final summit before next week's planned goodbye. Instead, Theresa May's here to ask for a pause, a little longer to untangle the mess.
This delay is a matter of personal regret to me, but a short extension would give Parliament the time to make a final choice that delivers on the result of the referendum.
Prime Minister, if it fails.
What matters is that we recognise that Brexit is the decision of the British people. We need to deliver on that. We're nearly 3 years on from the original vote.
It sounds so simple, what the Prime Minister is asking for, just a little bit more time. But it's anything but. She's struggling with disbelief here and frustration and resentment all around at home.
But it's the EU's call, not hers. A short delay, if MPs say yes to the deal, might be fine. Rely on that? Not yet.
President Juncker, what will you say to Theresa May tonight?
Are you Theresa May? No.
We can discuss and agree on an extension, if this is a technical extension, in case of a yes vote on the agreement we negotiated during 2 years. In case of no vote or no, directly, it will guide everybody to a no deal, for sure.
The Speaker of the House of Commons telling us that he doesn't want a new vote. It's Jean-Claude Juncker telling he doesn't want a new deal. So it's the normal door to get out of the situation is nearly gone. So we are more in a fire exit looking to find a solution.
Yeah, it's her problem and not her mistake that we are where we are. It's because too many people have so far played party politics on this issue. And my hope is that, of course, the UK Parliament next week will do the sensible thing and vote yes.
There's still huge resistance to the deal that's been voted down twice, from those who want another referendum, pulling a stunt in Brussels today, and some of the support that was there for the deal now slipping away at home.
I think there's a number of us who moved our position last week to vote for the deal, who are now saying, well, everything's back on the table. The situation has changed. The Prime Minister has asked for a delay. Many of us do not want a delay. We want us to keep our word to the British people.
There's some outrage too, though, after the Prime Minister pointed the finger at Parliament last night, upsetting the place she needs on side.
All of you are doing your best. This should not be, and I'm sure will not prove, to be a matter of any controversy whatsoever.
There is no escape from the controversy, though. Brexit is of the greatest importance and the greatest source of division. The Labour leader in Brussels too, a shadow negotiation of a sort.
We're therefore looking for alternatives and building a majority in Parliament that can agree on a future constructive economic relationship with the European Union. We've been discussing how this could come about, and we've been trying to reach out here.
Easier than it sounds. After nearly 3 years of this, the Prime Minister finally perhaps looks like she's among friends. But the scale of the political challenge is a clear and urgent foe.
So the talking's been going on for several hours already, and some indications coming out of these talks. Let's talk to our two experts, our Europe editor, Katja Adler, our political editor, Laura Kunsberg. Katja, first of all, some suggestions about the kind of extension they're offering, and then, of course, opening up the entire question about what the EU is more comfortable with if it comes to that issue of a no-deal exit.
Well, yes, and I can say that EU leaders are not at all comfortable with the idea of a no-deal Brexit. We heard from Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, today, who said that she wants to work right up until the last minute, she says, to avoid a no-deal. We heard something similar from Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council. And yes, we're beginning to see the draft conclusions of this summit on the idea of a Brexit extension. These are still draft conclusions. The leaders are still talking as we speak with one another. But it looks like that the leaders will offer Theresa May a short extension, not as long as she wanted, until the 30th of June, but rather until the 22nd of May. Why? Because on the 23rd of May, European parliamentary elections begin, and the UK, if it doesn't want to take part in those elections, it is separating those two issues. This short extension is conditional on MPs voting in favour of Theresa May's Brexit deal. So what happens if they reject it again? Does that definitely mean a no deal? Well, EU leaders have got another plan up their sleeve, something they're talking about right now as well. And that's the idea of offering the UK a longer extension, perhaps next week, to allow MPs to unite and really find consensus around something. Of course, the EU could also offer rolling short extensions, but that would be their ultimate nightmare, because it would mean that a no-deal Brexit would always be just around the corner.
Laura, we were talking last night about the Prime Minister's appeal to MPs, which proved to be rather provocative for lots of them. But again, it is this conditionality which could be a huge problem, and the stakes could not be higher now.
That's right. I mean, this is all of the utmost importance, of course, to the country and to the Prime Minister's leadership, because delivering Brexit at all, getting it done, getting us out, whether on time or slightly late, is absolutely at the heart of her very purpose as Prime Minister. And every time there's a suggestion of delay, or every time there's a suggestion that she might move to a softer Brexit, a closer relationship with the European Union than many in her own party would desire, the mood very suddenly turns toxic. And really that's what's happened in the last few days. And I can't overemphasise really how tricky things are for her, not just here, but at home in Westminster. We're talking to ministers behind the scenes, whatever side of the argument they're on. They are profoundly worried about all of this. And there are profound worries about whether or not Theresa May is the leader who will, in the end, be able to stitch all of this mess back together. Now, if she is granted a short delay, that, if you like, gives her a stay of execution, but there is no guarantee at this stage, no guarantee at all, that she'll be able to solve the fundamental problem, which is not having the numbers in the House of Commons to approve the deal that she and EU leaders spent so long putting together in this building.
Just very quickly, one sentence, Laura, given that we're talking about this 22nd of May, how will the Prime Minister try to sell that?
I think it will be, we have no choice. Let's have one more heave. She still says she's committed to the deal, but things are very febrile, and it's always a bit tricky to make predictions right now.
Laura, Katja, talk again later. Thank you very much, both of you. Laura Kuenssberg there, and Katja Adler, our political editor and Europe editor. One other piece of Brexit news today, which is that the Ministry of Defence has set up a new operations room inside the ministry to deal with a potential no-deal Brexit and the fallout. The preparations are being carried out under the title Operation Redfold, and the MOD insists that they are part of wider government plans already announced to do with the circumstances, potentially, of a no-deal Brexit. We'll have more from Brussels a little later from this summit. Sophie, thanks very much. We are still waiting for the news conference to take place with the President of the European Commission and other EU leaders to tell us maybe something about the conclusions as they see them for this summit. Laura Kuenssberg, our political editor, with me once again. Laura, is this summit going to resolve anything?
Well, Theresa May is in a very difficult position. What do you do if you're having a very hard time? You ask for a little bit of extra time to sort things out. And we do think that this summit tonight will grant her a bit of a pause to try to figure out this Brexit mess. But the fundamental question absolutely remains, will she get her deal through Parliament when she has more time to have a chance to do that? The signs do not look good. The prospects do not look healthy. And if it falls next week, what is her plan B? And we've learned from observing Theresa May over the last 2.5 years throughout this process,
Even the people who work closely with her can't tell you what her plan B really is. She doesn't want to tell EU leaders here in Brussels tonight, and she's not yet ready to tell her party or the public what she would do instead. So she'll get a bit of what she wants, we expect, but for all of us, tonight isn't going to remove the huge question mark.
Well, thanks very much. We'll talk again at 10 o'clock.
So here we are. Britain has asked the European Union for an extension to Brexit, but it is not clear what they're about to say in response. We're expecting press conferences any minute now. The scene is set for a crisis, MPs indicating that they still won't back the PM's deal, Theresa May insisting that she won't ask for a long extension, and the EU currently saying nothing except that they might convene an emergency summit next week. In Britain, over 1 million people have signed a petition in the last 24 hours calling for Article 50 to be revoked, a possibility that Jeremy Corbyn refused to rule out earlier. This is how the day unfolded here. Theresa May came to Brussels to boogie like a Remainer with her bosom buddy Angela Merkel. So much for the fantasy, so much for the mask. The real Theresa May makes the red carpet look like the plank. Lonelier than ever and friendless at home, she came begging for a political bailout, an extension of Article 50, which under the rules, every one of these member flags can veto. Never has Britain been less in control, and never has she.
What matters is that we recognise that Brexit is the decision of the British people. We need to deliver on that. We're nearly 3 years on from the original vote. It is now the time for Parliament to decide. A short extension gives us that opportunity to decide to leave the European Union, to deliver on that result of that referendum, and I sincerely hope that will be with a negotiated deal.
Is this your last question, Prime Minister? Will you accept no deal, Prime Minister? Will it be your fault if you leave with no deal?
The echo of questions will follow her all the way into the history books. Despite the glint in the glass, the mood here has shifted from thin hope to thick despair. Would you be prepared to sanction a longer delay of Article 50 if that meant avoiding a no-deal Brexit?
Well, this is a hypothetical question in a hypothetical situation. What is
it's all hypothetical at the moment.
Yes. No.
But we still need answers.
There is one reality now, which is a letter by Theresa May asking for an extension if the British Parliament would vote yes next week to the deal. I think today, if the British Parliament would say yes, lock, stock and barrel, to the whole thing on the table.
But even the table is missing, and if has become a very big word. And what happens if the deal is voted down in the House of Commons next week? Would you allow Britain to crash out without a deal?
But I hope that if there is a positive vote next week, so that we have a deal. The deal has been
But there may not be a positive vote. It really doesn't look like
if there is no positive vote, we go in the direction of a no deal, yes.
And you're prepared to put up with that? You're prepared for that eventuality?
Yes.
We are not the damage that will inflict.
Yeah, exactly. You start again last every time. We are not the bad guys in that story. You are not the bad guys, neither. But
who is the bad guy in the story, out of interest?
The people who told to the voters that Brexit would be something which would happen like that, would be no consequence. If there wouldn't be any consequence, and if there would be no interest for the UK to keep connected to the European Union, this would have been done in 2 weeks. We are speaking since months and years now about this exit strategy, and so it's all the people who lied before are responsible.
Plenty of bad blood, and it was left to President Macron to put the boot in.
We do respect what the Prime Minister and the Parliament are making, but we have to be clear. We can discuss and agree on an extension, if this is a technical extension, in case of a yes vote on the agreement we negotiated during 2 years. In case of no vote or a no, I mean, directly, it will guide everybody to a no deal, for sure.
They really want to get off Brexit and talk about all the other stuff that matters. Huddling with a club that will miss her and her country less and less, Mrs May's Gallic shrug of resignation was about the only thing not lost in translation today. And guess who? Like a matinee surprise in another building, Jeremy Corbyn, the man who hopes to walk on the red carpet soon. He's just spent an hour with Michel Barnier and Commission bigwigs, promising to deliver where Theresa May has failed.
We do believe we can construct a majority which will prevent the crashing out and all the chaos that will come from crashing out, and that is what we're absolutely focused on.
What makes you think you can do it this time when you've not been able to do it before?
We got a lot nearer last time than we did on previous occasions, and there's obviously a great concentration of minds in the British Parliament at the moment because of the, I think, danger of crashing out without a deal.
A concentration of minds, more like a confederacy of despair. Whatever the length of the extension agreed today and possibly revised next week at another summit, bad memories of Brexit will linger in this club long after the doors have shut. Now, they are still debating the timetable behind those closed doors that you just saw, and we were originally going to have a press conference with Donald Tusk an hour ago and then a press conference with Theresa May. That has been pushed back, certainly until now. We're just hearing, actually, from the Irish Times that it might have been pushed back a couple of hours. So who knows what's really going on. Let's bring in my guest, Vice President of the European Parliament, Mairead McGuinness. It's very confusing, isn't it?
It
is. What do you think is going on?
I'm not so sure that I know, but I think things are changing because we had these various dates. The Prime Minister looking for 30th of May, Europe offering 30th of June,
Yeah.
Europe offering the 22nd of May, and now I'm hearing different dates earlier in May. I'm not so sure that that matters much.
Does it make any difference?
No, but I'm wondering, is there something else going on inside that room? There are 2 or 3 scenarios likely next week. One, the withdrawal agreement gets through, and then everything else falls into place.
Right.
I think the question that perhaps is difficult to answer, what happens if it doesn't? Do we see a fourth meaningful vote, or do we then have a scenario where both the Prime Minister needs to look at a different timeline, or she goes for a no-deal Brexit? Nobody wants that. Maybe in that room they're discussing the consequences of the withdrawal agreement not getting through the House of Commons a third time. And that's why this is going on much longer than people had anticipated. I heard the word special configuration. I don't know what they mean. So I think that things are unfolding here. And maybe there is wisdom in trying to have different scenarios depending on how things go in the House of Commons, so that we're not shocked and unprepared for a no vote again, and that we have some sight of another option rather than no deal, which the House of Commons doesn't want.
Talking of shocked and unprepared, the impression that I really got here quite strongly for the first time, in these buildings, is that European leaders are now reckoning that a no-deal scenario, even if they're saying the opposite, is the most likely scenario, but also that they think that she has pivoted towards the Brexiteers in her own party, that for her that is more important because of internal polling than trying to save the deal.
Well, 2 points there. In terms of the internal issues for the Conservative Party, I think a lot of people have a sense in which David Cameron tried with the referendum to heal the rifts, and perhaps the Prime Minister is also trying to hold her party together. I mean, there are bigger issues than that in my view, because Brexit would be such a sundering if it goes wrong of relationships and bad for everybody, that I think it is unthinkable that we would allow that to happen. When you ask about the no deal scenario, I think yes, European leaders are preparing for the worst. We have to, because if the withdrawal
Expecting
agreement,
the worst?
Well, perhaps you're better expect it and hope it doesn't happen, but be prepared. If you look at what might happen if there is a vote Monday, and we don't know when the vote might happen, if it goes down, if we were ill prepared, it would be a disaster for our citizens. It will be difficult anyway, but we're better have our ducks in the row should things go wrong. And I think the UK should have the ducks in a row if it goes wrong.
And because of geography, Britain and Ireland are joined at the hip on this one, aren't they? So if we go out with a no deal, that's really bad news for Ireland, because all those things that you didn't want to happen might happen as a result.
Well, I think it's bad news for both of us. I think we're near neighbours, we're friends, so that would not be a good sign.
How
in terms
worried are
of,
you?
I mean, of course I'm worried. I represent a constituency that's close to Northern Ireland, so we are very determined to keep, if you like, things as they are today, whatever happens. But that would be very difficult in a no-deal scenario. I think the British Prime Minister knows that. She's also, with her tariff arrangements recently, indicated that we don't want to see any physical infrastructure. So yes, we're very worried. Of course Ireland would suffer, but I do have to say this. I think there's a sense from the UK that we would be suffering more than you would. This would really be bad for your consumers, bad for your food supply chain, bad for business. So I don't think it's in anyone's interest to go that far, even though at this moment that is the scenario we face.
Is there a sense in this city that European leaders, that you have run out of patience with Theresa May?
Look, Donald Tusk said there's Brexit fatigue. I don't think there's lack of patience, because I think in politics, if you don't have patience, you shouldn't be in the job. You need a lot of it, a bit like journalists. So we have to be patient. I think there is fatigue, but Donald Tusk rightly reminds us that we can't allow ourselves rest, because there is no time for that. And however impatient we might be, or tick-tock, we're at that moment now that I think to give in to fatigue at this stage would be to fail the people we represent. And I hope the Prime Minister has reserves of energy that she needs to get this over the line, to get Brexit sorted in an orderly way, perhaps even to look for a longer extension. Who knows?
Who knows? It's a bit of a nail-biter, that's for sure.
It is a nail-biter, indeed.
Mairead McGuinness, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Now, Prime Minister May's statement last night blaming MPs for not backing her Brexit deal caused huge turmoil in Westminster today. Furious MPs accused the Prime Minister of being contemptuous of Parliament and even endangering MPs. Downing Street denied that charge, but many believe the Prime Minister may have worsened her chances of winning a meaningful vote next week. So how is next week going to pan out? Let's go over to our political editor, Gary Gibbon in Westminster. Gary.
One Cabinet Minister who's close to the heart of the Brexit story said to me today that the possibilities of no deal were very real and rising. This particular Cabinet Minister talked about the possibility that if Britain were to crash out of the EU next week, there would be a very, very tiny sort of courtesy extension up to the 11th of April that would be all that was on offer from the EU, enough to sort of tidy up a few mini agreements before no deal itself. To understand, I think, just how dramatic events are getting, you do need to peer into the crystal ball for next week. If we have the meaningful vote next week, and the odds at the moment look like it would not do very well for Theresa May at all, partly because of that broadcast last night, but partly for other reasons that are well established, you could then move into a whole load of different votes that could happen in the House of Commons that could be trying to stop Brexit, revoke it with or stop it with a second referendum, or which could be trying to move to a softer Brexit. But those votes might not pass, and even if they did pass, the government might think that it didn't have to pick them up and pursue them. There's another vote that's being talked about, though, tonight, and that, because the Prime Minister has raised the prospect of her deal or no deal, is a vote of no confidence. If her deal goes down, it is very possible that the Leader of the Opposition might feel that's the moment to reach for a vote of no confidence. It only requires now, remember, just a handful of Tory MPs to change sides, and that vote of no confidence passes 2 days before the Brexit deadline. If you thought this week was pretty alarming and rudderless, well, next week, viewers of a nervous disposition really might want to look away. When the Trades Union Congress chief and the CBI chief tour the studios together with a joint stark warning, you know you're in very dangerous terrain.
So we are joined with the TUC today. It's very unusual, but we've set our differences aside to come together to say this is a national emergency and we need to change course.
Last night's statement to the nation by the Prime Minister, in which she made a direct attack on MPs, did nothing to calm nerves in Westminster.
Or do they not want to leave at all, causing potentially irreparable damage to public trust, not just in this generation of politicians, but to our entire democratic process?
I think she probably has made life more difficult for herself, because many MPs will feel, why is she passing all the blame on us? We didn't negotiate this deal, she did.
In Chippenham in Wiltshire today, strong echoes from some of the Prime Minister's attack. There's no guarantee that'll help to deliver the vote.
I think a lot of the MPs are to blame for the hassle that she's had, because I don't feel that she's got the backing.
I think people's going to vote with their feet very soon.
By doing what?
Not voting for them, voting them out, every one of them. I think they'll be looking for a brand new party.
MPs are equally to blame as the Prime Minister. But at the end of the day, the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister, and she should be leading from the front.
The tone of the attack on MPs sparked cross words in the Commons.
One of the most contemptuous statements that I've ever heard, and that's up against some pretty stiff competition. Could I now ask the Leader of the House again if she agrees with what the Prime Minister said last night?
Leader of the House.
This is not. I will.
Order, let's grow up. Do grow up. For goodness sake, this is not a matter of party political hackery.
Mr. Speaker, may I just say that your response does not raise the level, but I'll leave it there.
Order, resume your seat, Leader of the House. My response sets out the constitutional position that has applied to members of the House of Commons over generations.
Just before that TV statement to the nation, Theresa May invited nearly 20 Tory MPs into her office in the Commons. Many of them told her her time was nearly up.
You saw her last night. Is authority virtually gone?
Well, she's still the Prime Minister, and everybody was courteous, but and I do, and I've always said this, I always admire her Zebedee-like qualities, jumping out and being resilient, but I felt it was a different Prime Minister that we saw
shrunken
last night. I felt she inevitably, she looked exhausted and anxious by events, and I want her to be not someone who's swept by the events, but actually lead the events.
So that moment may already have passed.
Well, we're going to find that out next week.
We asked an expert on the EU and an expert on the British Constitution how a momentous week ahead could pan out. After Theresa May's statement on Monday, the government could hold the meaningful vote on Tuesday, and it's expected to fail. Indicative votes could follow on Wednesday, in which support for a customs union, joining the single market, a second referendum, a long extension to Brexit might all be tested.
The Prime Minister said in Prime Minister's Questions yesterday that if the House rejected her deal again on a meaningful vote, it would be for the House to decide what happened next. So it suggests as though she's going to give it over to the House. But the government isn't bound to follow a motion. It's just political pressure to do that. So
and the pressure could be quite hard, because I think if the government said it wanted to pursue no deal or drifted towards no deal, there'd be a motion of no confidence put forward by the opposition. Quite a lot of Tories would vote for it, the government would fall. So I don't think Parliament would allow a government to proceed towards no deal.
Thursday we've got the European Council sitting there, a jury in judgment, and gives us 2 or 3 weeks to manage us towards no deal. And they think there is a serious possibility that that is where things are heading.
The issue of how bad would no deal be, there are clearly nuances amongst them, or even worse than nuances, quite bad divisions. The French, the Spanish, some others are giving us the impression they're quite relaxed about no deal. It might even be a good thing to get shot of. But other countries, particularly Ireland, but also Germany, the Nordics, the Baltics, the Poles, we would give anything to keep the British in if they could. They'd be happy to have a long extension, so in the hope that the British might change their mind and have another referendum.
Friday should have been a day's holiday for Parliament, but it could be one of the most important days in recent British political history.
I think that sort of Friday could be a very sort of long, maybe not so good Friday that we face as the UK comes to terms with whatever has come out of that European summit.
The stopwatch could really be on Friday.
I wouldn't be surprised. And maybe that on Friday, Parliament may face some pretty unpalatable choices given to it by the European Council the day before. And Parliament may have to decide to accept something that many of its MPs don't want to do in order to avoid no deal, and that may be a very dangerous and difficult day for everybody.
Some MPs are finding getting clarity from the Prime Minister on the stark choices ahead isn't an easy task.
Do you think she actually knows, hand on heart, what happens the other side of defeat next week?
No. I have to say I feel very dispirited and unsure of where we're being led.
One face of Parliament's most famous symbol was uncovered today. The secrets of how this crisis unfurls are unknowable.
Gary Gibbon in Westminster. As we heard, the trade unions and CBI joined forces today to warn that the UK is facing a national emergency. They have written to the Prime Minister demanding that a Plan B is drawn up to avoid a no-deal departure in 8 days' time. Carolyn Fairbairn, Director General of the Confederation of British Industry, and Francis O'Grady, the General Secretary of the TUC, are here in the studio. How big a national emergency? I mean, it's pretty rare for anyone to talk about a national, but for the two of you, How big?
Well, I think that we're hearing what a political crisis is. It's an economic crisis as well. I've been with businesses this week talking about their preparations for no deal. They are not ready. The impact on our economy of a no deal Brexit would be a wrecking ball for ordinary people's lives. It's why we're here together. We're talking about people's jobs and lives. So the paramount importance now is to avoid no deal. And it will take compromise, leadership from the front, which is why we're here together today.
I mean, one of the issues here, which is rather sad in a way, because many of your members will have voted to leave, particularly in the north and the more deprived areas of the country. It's a very, very confusing picture.
We know that, in fact, a majority of people at work and 6 in 10 trade unionists voted Remain. But that means that we've got 40% who voted Leave. But I think what's important is that whichever way you voted, we don't want working people ending up having to pay the price for a mess that I think the Prime Minister has got to prioritise clearing up. And we've been very clear, rule out no deal, extend Article 50, but come up with and start listening to MPs who could command a majority around a different deal.
Do you believe that Theresa May is the right person to be managing this crisis, this national emergency?
I think she's shown, if I'm honest, a tin ear to concerns that have been expressed. She seems to be a broken record and keeps pushing a deal that suffered a historic defeat, a thumping defeat on the second round. I think she needs to know when to recognise that that deal is not going to get through. But she needs to start speaking up for the country as a whole, not just the European Research Group on her back benches. But, you know, we've got people in Honda a week on Saturday demonstrating to defend their plant. I'm not saying Brexit's the whole story, but it's a big part of it. And that uncertainty is putting livelihoods at risk.
I mean, as Monsieur Macron suggested, the truth is it seems that she's battling to keep her party together rather than the country together.
Well, I think that the country has to now absolutely come first, and the red lines that have been laid out need to be revisited to be able to create
you know,
that
viewers
compromise.
won't remember what red lines are.
Well, they were in blood early on,
Mm.
and they have prevented a compromise being reached. Now, business has actually been absolutely clear that they want to make Brexit work. They are not trying to fight Brexit, but they are trying to create an environment where they can continue to trade, they can grow, they can succeed, and that's the national interest that we're talking about here today.
Well, I mean, does Mrs May have to pledge that she will not tolerate a no deal?
We think so. We think so. If you
Both
look,
of you.
It's clearly reckless. And, you know, this isn't a political game. This is about people's jobs, their livelihoods, their rights at work. These things matter to people. It shouldn't be something to use as a threat or to try and bully people into voting for a deal that is going down. Instead, we need to find a new deal that prioritises jobs and workers' rights.
This is sort of civil society calling now through you, I mean, to get the country back on track again.
Well, I think that what we have all been doing is we've been listening to what businesses have been saying, and I speak to so many now who've got plans in their bottom drawer for supply chains that move out of the UK, for factories that they will close. Those voices have to be heard now. That's why we're talking about emergency, and it is about leading from the front. That's why we've written to the Prime Minister herself. We think she can and must, over the next few days, change course and start bringing compromise in Parliament and lead the country out of this.
So, I mean, if we fall out next Friday, or not much later than that, what is the effect?
I don't think she'll be able to blame MPs for that. I think she's got a direct and personal responsibility. She's the elected Prime Minister of this country. A way forward could be found. We know that's possible. She's got to give MPs the opportunity to take those indicative votes, to try and craft a consensus and a compromise way forward that is a good deal for ordinary people.
We're not sure compromise is in her vocabulary.
But Only 4% of businesses we've asked have said they're ready for no deal. It will be chaos and it will be about people's jobs and lives.
And what do you make of what's going on in Brussels at the moment? I mean, they do seem extremely frustrated with this.
Well, I think that is enormously alarming to hear the emotion in people's voices, to see the febrile atmosphere. I think that concerns business even more. And that's why we need the leadership that can cut through that and get us out of this mess.
Well, thank you both very, very warmly. It's very rare to have the CBI and the TUC in the studio at the one time, so thank you both. Let's get some reaction now from MPs. A Labour MP and chair of the House of Commons Brexit Committee, Hilary Benn, is in Westminster, and in his constituency of Welwyn-Hatfield is Conservative MP Grant Shapps. Grant Shapps, could I just ask you first, is Mrs May going to win the vote next week?
Almost certainly not. 4 or 5 things would have to come together. Obviously, winning over the Speaker to allow her to do it. She'll probably get there because the EU will give her a piece of paper to allow that to happen, some legal document. Then the DUP, then some of the ERGers who might follow the DUP, then probably 15 to 20 Labour MPs. She only won 3 of them last time. And then I think there's a group of another quite significant sized group who'll say they won't support her deal unless there's a different negotiating team doing the future agreement. So that's a lot of ifs before you get to a yes with that deal.
Hilary Benn, you could hear the things which are going on in Brussels, and I'm wondering, therefore, if she doesn't win next week, what happens?
Well, the European Council will meet again, it seems, next Thursday. But this is a full-blown national crisis, which, with a government that is rudderless, that is living a hand-to-mouth existence. And the first priority, because in a crisis you need to work out what is the most urgent thing to do. And the first priority, for the sake of the nation, is to ensure that we get an extension. And therefore, if the EU offers the UK an extension, if it involves having to take part in European Parliament elections, then I think it needs to be accepted by the Prime Minister. The fact she asked for a short one, when previously the Deputy Prime Minister had warned that a short one-off extension would be damaging and reckless, I don't think that rises to the scale of the task.
What is a realistic one? How will viewers know that some decent date has been achieved?
Well, which brings me on to the second priority, which is to enable Parliament, John, to begin to see whether there is an alternative approach which can command a majority. For 2 3/4 years, the government has failed to reach out across the House of Commons. It has failed to try and create consensus. The Prime Minister laid out her red lines and she has refused to move an inch. And a group of us as cross-party MPs have put down an amendment for Monday to give us the chance on Wednesday to start that process. But indicative votes are only relevant if we have ensured that we do not crash out with no deal on Friday.
Well, Grant Shapps, I mean, there is talk of a vote of confidence next week. Do you expect such a thing? And do you believe, as an MP, that MPs will take back control next week?
Well, on the first point, obviously it's up to the leader of the opposition or any other party if they want to call a vote of no confidence. I suspect that still wouldn't pass, despite some of the murmurings following the Prime Minister's speech last night that Conservatives would somehow support it. I certainly wouldn't. I don't expect others would. And, you know, on the second part of it, if you think this has been a mess, which clearly it has been, the last several months with an executive, a cabinet, a government running the business of the House, if not controlling the outcome of the votes, you wait till you see what it's like when Parliament itself takes control, if that was what was to happen. For the simple reason, I was speaking to Oliver Letwin, who I know has been working with Hilary and others on motions to try and achieve this, and it's quite possible, we both think, that there isn't a majority in Parliament for any given Brexit outcome. So the idea that giving the power to Parliament will solve it is quite simply untrue. I think it will make us even more rudderless than today, which is a frightening thought.
Well, Grant Shapps and Hilary Benn, thank you both very much indeed. I hope bringing you out into the outdoors hasn't taken more of your voice away.
Oh, you're very kind. I'd just say, John, Parliament could hardly do a worse job than the government has managed over the last few weeks.
Hilary Benn, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's go to Brexit again now. And earlier I spoke to the former Chancellor and father of the House of Commons, Ken Clarke. I put it to him, the warning from the TUC and the CBI that we are facing a national emergency. And I asked him what MPs like him can do about it.
I mean, everybody's fed up with being told this week the crucial, meaningful votes coming and all the rest of it. Next week is really important. I think the Prime Minister is going to insist on trying to get her deal through again, and she won't. So what we've got to do is make sure that we extend Article 50 by a reasonable period of time, that we spend that first part of that time actually having proper votes and debates in Parliament to enable us to form some sort of consensus, some sort of majority.
Last night in her television address, Mrs May did not look like the person who was going to do what you want done. She attacked MPs and seemed to think it had nothing to do with her. Does she need to go?
I don't think her going would solve anything at all. I mean, just quite how a Tory leadership election would help us at the moment, I have no idea.
But you did,
you
did once do it before. You went to see Mrs Thatcher and she went.
The circumstances were different. The atmosphere was rather saner. There was a clear feeling in the party that she could go, and that there were acceptable candidates who would stand. The moment, just divert attention by having a Conservative leadership election and then electing a new leader who would face just the same problems and probably have even more difficulty uniting the party than Theresa had. Now, that's a sideshow.
A general election?
A general election? I don't know what that would solve. I mean, the public would be furious if we just called a general election.
But it might pull a government of national unity out of the bag, and that might, after all, the Europe dispute doesn't actually fit the party politics.
No, it doesn't. It's always, never has. The right and the hard right and the hard left are the Brexiteers, centre right, centre left, pro-Europeans. But the national interest does mean that, firstly, we've got to, I think, pull people across.
Can I just pause you for a moment, because you are describing a situation in which perhaps a government of national unity, which was neither left nor right, might pull the thing together.
I would say it was an excellent idea, but I see no signs of anybody remotely ready to organise any such thing.
But at the moment, it looks as if Mrs May herself is headed very strongly towards trying to get her deal through, and if she doesn't, she seems very happy to have a no deal.
Well, it depends what day, you know. I think she says to people who are pro-Europeans, it's either my deal or no deal, and she says to Brexiteers, it's either my deal or no Brexit. Because, frankly, at the moment, I don't think she has any more idea than we do of where we go if her further attempts to get her deal through just collapse. But the House of Commons, I think, has got to assert itself next week. The House of Commons have got to stop being excluded from all this by procedural devices and so on. The House of Commons has got to have proper debates, proper votes, and strive to reach a cross-party consensus which the government can then work out how to negotiate. But it's quite obvious we need more time, and we can't suffer all the economic damage that the CBI and the TUC fear simply because nobody can think of anything to do before next week.
You're the father of the House. Can you place this crisis in history?
Oh, well, certainly not in my time. If you're saying in my political time, there was anything like it. This is complete madness. It makes Maastricht seem like a peaceful tea party in comparison. History, well, like that, I'd be going back to the 17th century. I think obviously the outbreak of the Second World War was extremely serious. The Irish crisis before the First World War. This is in the same league. I mean, it is a serious constitutional crisis. Our strong parliamentary democracy has been made dysfunctional by the reactions largely of the more extreme people to a blasted referendum, which we should never have held.
Ken Clark, thank you very much for talking to us.
Well, welcome back to Brussels. Now, we had hoped to give you a definitive date for an extension at the beginning of the programme and indeed a press conference. We've had neither because we are being told that they are still in the middle of the discussions. They've had a quick break. They're going to have a very long dinner. They might have an all-nighter. You never know. This building is not a stranger to that. The key issue is this, that apparently the French are trying to push for a much earlier extension until May the 7th, but without any conditions attached. What does that mean? It means that the pressure on MPs to pass the meaningful vote next week is off if that is confirmed. That means she doesn't need to do that vote next week if she wants the extension, but it would be a much shorter extension because when their next big EU summit in Romania at the beginning of May, they want that summit to take place not under the shadow of Brexit. Gary, what about you? What can you add?
Well, if that does turn out to be the case, it'll be a bit of a surprise to some pretty senior people in government. It would mean, I think, that the European Union had thrown a lifebelt, an inflatable lifebelt towards Theresa May, but one with a not particularly slow puncher. It could mean that the dramatic events that we thought might unfold next week might unfold the week after, might be slightly delayed. I think some people who want to explore other options will think they have a bit more time to do this, and that the European Union may have thrown them a lifeline. But time, even with this Macron plan, if it were to happen, remains incredibly tight, and the mountain to climb that Theresa May needs in votes to get her deal through looks right now insurmountable.
So, Matt, does that mean that Theresa May's days are more numbered or less numbered as a result of this extension?
Theresa May's days are probably slightly longer than they might have been, but her future doesn't look rosy. The atmosphere amongst MPs here was pretty gloomy and was only added to by the broadcast that she did last night. And of course, one of the things which she was trying to calm down there was the anger about a delay. This is an even longer delay, so it doesn't exactly cheer up her ratings.
Gary, thank you very much indeed. Well, we're still waiting for those definitive dates at the end, and it is extraordinary to think that just a week before Brexit was supposed to happen, we are so much in the fog about the dates, about the terms of extension, about the future of our nation. It was all about taking back control, but I have to say, at the moment, it looks as if the EU has never had more control over the fate of Great Britain. What a thought.
If the last few weeks have taught us anything, it is that leaving the European Union gets more complicated by the day, even by the hour. Tonight in Brussels, deadlines and draft suggestions on when it might happen came and went. The Prime Minister arrived there today asking the other EU countries for a Brextension to June the 30th. It appears they're heading towards extending our departure date now until the 22nd of May, if Mrs May's deal is agreed by MPs next week. If it isn't, then the UK will have until April the 12th to come up with another way forward to qualify for a longer extension or risk leaving without a deal. If anything, it looks as though the EU countries are now trying to make things easier rather than harder for the UK.
It could very well be her last ever summit, her last appearance on the European stage, but she came to it as a supplicant, asking her 27 leaders to give her more time. Britain will leave the EU in 8 days unless they grant her request, and will have little choice but to accept whatever conditions they may attach, unless it is Theresa May's intention to leave with no deal.
If your deal fails and if you will not ask for a long extension, are you preparing to lead the country out of the EU without a deal a week tomorrow?
What is important is that Parliament delivers on the result of the referendum and that we deliver Brexit for the British people. I sincerely hope that we can do that with a deal.
But if it fails? Prime Minister, if it fails?
What matters is that we recognise that Brexit is the decision of the British people. We need to deliver on that. We're nearly 3 years on from the original vote.
And nor, it seems, are we about to find out. A few feet away along the red carpet, France's President Macron was being much blunter. He would not agree to a long extension without profound political change in London. And if the Commons again says no...
In case of no vote or no, I mean, directly, it will guide everybody to a no deal, for sure.
His was the hardest line, supported, it seems, by Belgium. But as the day wore on, the discussion in the room was to take some unexpected turns. Mrs May was questioned repeatedly about what she planned if her deal was defeated again. She told them no more than she told us. The serious talking began with Britain firmly outside the room, some countries wanting a much more flexible approach to an extension with fewer conditions, including the possibility of a much longer delay, even though the UK hasn't asked for it. With the discussion stretching through dinner and Theresa May now condemned to eat alone, this photo emerged, taken by the Bulgarian ambassador, of officials huddled in a corridor debating and haggling over Britain's fate. The notable absentee, any British representative. The problem, according to some of those who were in the room where it was happening, is that they were given so little detail about what Britain was intending that they decided to make a plan of their own. It's unconfirmed, but that seems to be an extension until May the 22nd if the withdrawal agreement has been passed. If it hasn't, the deadline becomes April the 12th, at which point Britain will either leave with no deal or have an option to go for a much longer extension. It was always expected that somehow this was all going to end late at night with a series of compromises. What wasn't anticipated was that an issue of such importance to the UK would be decided without British involvement. How that will play in Westminster is unclear, and the leaders here have pretty much given up trying to guess. James Mates, News at 10, Brussels.
Well, let's go straight now to our political editor, Robert Preston, who's in Brussels. And Robert, we'll talk in a moment about how this might play out in Westminster. But after one of these famous long nights in Brussels, what more can you tell us about what's been agreed so far?
This was all supposed to be done and dusted by 6 o'clock tonight, but it is turning into perhaps the most historic European Council that a British Prime Minister has ever attended, because it will have a profound impact not only on our future relationship with the EU, but frankly on whether she can survive as Prime Minister and whether there's going to be civil war at Westminster. What looks as though it's been approved, but I'm not going to bet on it because talks are still going on and we haven't seen the final conclusions yet, is that next week MPs will be told that if they vote for the Prime Minister's deal, then we will get an extension to May the 22nd to complete all the necessary preparations and legislation. But if they don't, then there will be a huge decision to make by April the 12th. Whether at that point to try and find another way through, another solution to this Brexit crisis, possibly a referendum, possibly another kind of Brexit deal, but also participate in the European parliamentary elections. Now that would keep us as members of the EU conceivably till the end of the year. The alternative, if by April the 12th the MPs do not decide to extend till the end of the year, or even possibly longer, is we would crash out, we would leave without a deal at that point. Now the Prime Minister has said that she does not want to be Prime Minister if we stay in the EU longer than the end of June. So in a way the EU has said tonight, actually, this is a decision about whether Theresa May will remain as Prime Minister longer, well, frankly, than, the spring.
And apart from making all of our heads ache tonight, Robert, how is this likely to be received back in Westminster, do you think? What are you hearing already?
It will cause absolute uproar, and it will, in my view, divide both Labour and Tory parties, because both parties contain considerable numbers of people who hate her deal. Some of them hate her deal because they would rather have a no-deal Brexit. Some of them hate her deal because they want some other they want to take longer to decide whether to have a referendum or a different kind of Brexit altogether. So this, in my view, will divide both parties straight down the middle, and I think we are on the brink, dare I say it, of civil war in Parliament.
Robert, thank you very much for that. Well, the speech Mrs May made last night inside Downing Street, telling the country that MPs were holding up Brexit, has been blamed by some of them today for threats to their safety. The independent MP, Anna Soubry, says she can't return to her constituency this weekend because of them. Labour's Paula Sheriff said she'd been threatened with having her head chopped off and said Mrs May needed to dial down the hate.
Blaming the Brexit deadlock on MPs was never going to go down well. But today it overshadowed cross-party talks, one former Conservative backbencher specifically linking the Prime Minister's rhetoric with threats to her own safety.
I'm not able to go home this weekend. I am not safe.
You know, and when a senior police officer tells your partner that if it was his wife in the situation that I am in, he would say, I am frightened for her safety, I think that tells you everything.
In the Commons, a Labour MP also urged Theresa May to change her tone.
Last week I received a message saying that my head should be chopped off, among lots and lots of other messages, in common with many other members on both sides of this House. I apprehended the Prime Minister last Thursday evening and I begged her, dial down the hate, Prime Minister. It is in your power to dial down the hate.
Hello, how are you doing?
Hours later, this MP was attacked while out in his constituency, afterwards suggesting MPs shouldn't have been singled out.
So only earlier on, when we were going up and down the street, someone grabbed my glasses and tried and assault me. And that is the tone which Theresa May has set in this country. She is now part of the problem.
You, the public, have had enough. You're tired of the infighting. You're tired of the political games and the arcane procedural rows. Tired of MPs talking about...
These were the words that caused the backlash. Today, Number 10 flatly rejected the idea Mrs May's remarks were inflammatory. But they came as the Deputy Speaker was warning MPs about their safety. In an email, Lindsay Hoyle wrote, "Personally, I have never felt this level of tension during my time in the House. We can take simple steps to improve our personal safety by travelling home from the House by taxi or with colleagues in the coming days." This MP is among many who feel the Prime Minister now needs to change course and fast.
I believe, as do many others, that the reason that we're in this mess is because of the catastrophic failure of leadership of the Prime Minister, not because of MPs.
Certainly getting the green light for any Brexit deal still depends on getting the votes of MPs. Libby Vina, News at 10, Westminster.
There is an extraordinary story unfolding in Brussels tonight. 27 EU leaders were locked in debate and for hours over the best way to deal with Theresa May's last-ditch effort to secure an extension and to try to get a Brexit deal through. Donald Tusk has just tweeted that the EU27 had made a unanimous decision and are talking right now to Theresa May. But for the first time in this whole process, there appeared to have been splits between countries over the length of the extension and on what terms. There were meant to be press conferences at 7 o'clock, but instead, after Theresa May was cross-examined for 90 minutes over her plan, EU leaders were working late into the night. Initially, it appeared the UK might get an extension to May the 22nd. Then there was speculation that it could be shorter. And now, recently, draft conclusions have emerged that suggest the EU may give the PM an extra fortnight to get a deal. Nothing still for certain. Our political editor, Nick Watt, is in Brussels and has the latest. Nick, over to you.
Yes, well, as you say, EU leaders have taken great pride that they've been united on Brexit, but tonight those divisions were out in the open. But as you say, just finally got there over the line, and it looks like what they've agreed tonight is that there can be an extension of the Article 50 process until the 22nd of May if Parliament approves Theresa May's deal next week. If it doesn't approve it, then the extension is until the 12th of April, but before then the UK would have to give an indication if it would, what its way forward would be. Would it be willing to take part in European parliamentary elections, and that could possibly lead to a longer extension. So what this means is big pressure next week for the Prime Minister to get her deal through. But if it fails to get through, then we don't leave next Friday, which means potentially space for other options and maybe potentially a space for a longer extension if the UK took part in those European parliamentary elections. Now, it was a very difficult evening, as you say, 20-minute grilling of Theresa May. She was repeatedly asked, what happens if your deal's not endorsed by Parliament? Answer came there, none. And it was also obviously the first public disagreements. France really wanted to turn the screw and say UK would be out by the 7th of May. But old allies like the Netherlands and Germany, well, they weighed in and said, can we just keep the door open for a little longer?
So realistically, what does this mean for the UK?
Well, if the Prime Minister's deal goes through, then it will be, as she said, an orderly Brexit. If it doesn't get through, there is now the potential of a window for alternative options. We were reporting last night that there's a cross-party attempt to seize the Commons order paper next Wednesday for indicative votes, and the front runner is this thing called Common Market 2.0, a customs arrangement and a close relationship with the single market. There's a lot of feeling that the Labour Party and sort of Tory Remainers could weigh in behind that. Now, Jeremy Corbyn was getting quite strong support in Brussels today behind what he calls a close economic partnership, but the message to him is time is unbelievably short. Parliament's got to agree this next week or the week after. If not, it ain't going to happen. So quite a day, and here's how it panned out.
A cavalcade sweeping in as the journey possibly nears its end. An awkward encounter as the brakes are ever so reluctantly applied with a request for a brief delay to Brexit. A 90-minute grilling for Theresa May, and then a first for this tortuous Brexit process after she left the table. Deep and open divisions within the EU. The man shepherding the leaders had wanted to grant an extension until the 22nd of May if Parliament passes the deal. But France wanted to shorten this to the 7th of May. Old friends of Britain fought back to keep the 22nd of May in play. In an anguished atmosphere in the summit corridors, there were also calls to keep open a longer extension. To trigger this, the UK would have to notify the EU by mid-April that it would participate in the European parliamentary elections. A long day had begun with one ambition in mind.
An historic moment as Theresa May arrives to what she hopes will be the last scheduled European Council attended by a British Prime Minister as a member of the European Union.
What is important is that Parliament delivers on the result of the referendum and that we deliver Brexit for the British people. I sincerely hope that we can do that with a deal. I'm still working on ensuring that Parliament can agree a deal so that we can leave in an orderly way.
Shortly after the Prime Minister arrived, the German Chancellor pitched up, one of the key decision makers who will decide how this pans out.
But differences hung in the air.
I think you and we all must be aware that we are dealing with something of historical importance. And therefore we must also tread carefully and above all do everything possible to the last hour to ensure that there may be an orderly exit for the UK from the EU.
We can discuss and agree on an extension, if this is a technical extension, in case of a yes vote on the agreement we negotiated during 2 years. In case of no vote or no, directly, it will guide everybody to a no deal, for sure.
Is this a British crisis or a European crisis?
We are now so much part of the bubble that it's difficult. You are the journalist, you have to tell me.
But what I'm interested in is you have personal support for Theresa May, but the Netherlands, an old ally of the United Kingdom, is your patience wearing thin with the United Kingdom?
Well, even if it was not, next week Friday is Brexit Day. And we are not close now to a solution.
And Theresa May essentially yesterday said, it's my deal or it's no deal. What would no deal mean for the UK and for the Netherlands?
For the UK, I think it's catastrophic. You already can see it, your economic growth, the way the country is now seen in the world. I've seen today a poll on BBC website that I believe 80 or 90% of people in the UK feel that you cut now a diminished country in the eyes of the rest of the world. And that, of course, will accelerate to 100%. Next Friday if there is a hard Brexit.
Am I detecting a little bit of disappointment?
One Prime Minister insisted that negotiations with the UK are over.
We are not on the souk. It's not the marketplace where we start again to negotiate and to negotiate. So we did the negotiations. They agreed. It's not unilateral. The UK agreed on the negotiations we had with them. And a positive outcome is in the interest of all, but time is ticking.
Are you completely fed up with Theresa May?
No, I think that she did the best she was able to. She was tough. She was not always easy. Huh? She did really the best, and I hope that the House of Commons will also respect the energy, the patience, she put really to find an agreement in the interest of all of us.
Britain may be leaving, but some things never change. A freewheeling Brussels summit stretching into the night.
Nick Watt, well, some conclusions appear to be coming through from the summit in Brussels in the last few minutes. It's being reported that, I quote, the European Council will agree to an extension until the 22nd of May 2019, provided the withdrawal agreement has been approved by the House of Commons next week. If the withdrawal agreement is not approved by the House of Commons next week, the European Council agrees on an extension to the 12th of April 2019 and expects the United Kingdom to indicate a way forward before this date for consideration by the European Council. Well, in a moment, we're going to be joined from Brussels by an MEP, but right now we are going to be joined by Ben Chew, our economics editor, because on Newsnight over the last few weeks, we have revealed that there have been potential problems with the UK's preparation for a no-deal Brexit, particularly in the area of medicines. But tonight, our economics editor, Ben Chew, has learned that there's huge concern amongst businesses right across Europe. Ben, what have you found out?
Well, Kirsty, we've been used to hearing about the complaints of UK firms about the state of UK government planning for a no-deal Brexit. What we've learned tonight is there's very much concern on the other side of the channel as well. They're concerned about the the European Commission specifically level planning. Essentially, all the big business lobby groups across Europe, including our own CBI, incidentally, have written to the European Commission to say that your contingency plans for a no-deal Brexit do not go far enough. And just some context here. The European Commission put out its plans in December, and since then people like Donald Tusk, Michel Barnier have been saying we're ready. Well, the message of this letter that Newsnight has seen is very much the opposite. They say those contingency measures fall short of what is needed to limit major disruptions. I've been speaking to a policy official from the CBI today, which has been very much involved in producing this letter.
Our message to the Commission is there are ways of improving and managing no deal a little bit more. We know that no deal will have significant consequences, but no one is ready. Not the UK, not the EU. No one is going to be ready for no deal. But there are ways that we can make sure that the costs for citizens on the UK and the EU side are lower.
Okay, now what are they most concerned about?
Well, one of the big things they mentioned is aviation. Now, they say that the European Commission's plans to do a regulatory rollover to keep those planes in the air in a no-deal scenario might not be enough to keep traffic moving. They're concerned about medical supplies, this time going from the UK to the EU, medical devices as well. Data is another thing they mention. Really, really important for multinational firms to be able to transfer data from the UK to the EU. They're worried that won't happen.
So, the Commission, have they actually made a response to this letter?
The Commission have said that they have received this letter, that they will respond in due course, and that they always talk to business representatives and take their concerns seriously. Now, what does due course mean? We've been hearing about a possible extension. It's still not a very long time to give a substantive response to these many demands being made by European businesses.
Well, Ben, thank you very much. And now Philippe Lamberts from European Parliament's Brexit Steering Group has been watching the twists and turns of these negotiations, and he joins us tonight. First of all, Philippe, what do you make of the announcement that's come out that if Theresa May gets her deal through, there'll be an extension to May the 22nd for all the technical reasons, and if she doesn't get it through, there's a shorter extension to find another way forward? Is this the EU trying to control things?
Well, it's not the EU trying to control things. We try to make sense out of things because, quite frankly, when you read the letter of the Prime Ministers, it was basically spelling no-deal Brexit between the lines. And, well, we would like to have a clear strategy. When she was asked, well, what happens if you can't get the deal through next week, the answer was basically, I don't know. And that is, of course, scary. Now, it may be part of our tactics to have the EU27 looking into the abyss as well. So I think that the dual delay that has been put on the table is reasonable. So either the deal gets approved next week, and then indeed it's up until the European election that the UK has to get itself organized, or it doesn't get passed, and by the 12th of April we need a plan. And based on that plan, we can then decide what's next and potentially a longer extension. But we cannot possibly talk about a longer extension without knowing what the British government has in mind.
So, before we go on to talk about the longer extension, the significance of the date of the 12th of April is because that's when people have to declare whether they're taking part in the European elections.
Yeah.
So, you're giving this short window of an extra fortnight. And so, is the EU hoping to conduct that, in fact, there's going to be the conducting in the UK of a separate way forward? I mean, I know that, Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer saw Michel Barnier today. There's been talk in the British Parliament, particularly by the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, saying there's something else that people can coalesce around. Do you think that what's going to happen here, if MV3, if the meaningful vote 3 does not get passed, that there's going to be a coalition of the willing for a softer Brexit, perhaps in the customs union and a form of the single market?
Yeah, well, first, it's not for the EU to give shape to any coalition in Westminster. That's for the British politicians to decide what they want to do. What I hope is that indeed, at long last, we would have a cross-party coalition for, well, either orderly Brexit or another solution. I don't know what that might be. Now, as to the option of keeping the UK in the customs union and or in the single market, that doesn't change the fact that if you want to get there, you need to get the withdrawal agreement agreed. Because that would be, of course, the future relationship, which can't happen without the separation having been properly negotiated. So, one way or another, if the end game is a form of Brexit, whatever that form is, the withdrawal agreement will still need to be approved.
Now, the other thing you said was whether we're going to go for a short period of time and an attempt to get another deal through should Theresa May deals fails. You also mentioned the idea of a much longer extension. On what grounds would there be a much longer extension?
Well, from the discussions I've had with Michel Barnier, the question is about a political process. So, if the British government would come back to us saying, well, listen, we couldn't solve the issue in Westminster, we need to go back to the people. Either way, through elections or through a new referendum, that is a democratic process. Mm-hmm. We cannot possibly stand in the way of a democratic process. And if the UK asks times for that, we have to grant the time. And yes, it can create complications with the European elections, I know that. But then again, unless the United Kingdom is out by the day of the European elections, it will be a member. And if it is a member, it has to organise the elections.
Now, in a minute, Philippe Lambert, I'm going to have to break away from you because the press conferences are starting. But one question now. It appears tonight that obviously there's been a tussle in that meeting, particularly between President Macron and the others. But there also appears to be a determination that there's not ever going to be a no-deal Brexit. Is that your analysis?
Well, I was not in the room. I've heard indeed strange positions taken by reportedly being taken by President Macron, but I think that in the end common sense has prevailed.
Thank you very much, Philippe Lambert. And now we are going straight over to Brussels for the first of the press conferences.
En place et nos préparations continuent. Nous avons adopté 19 propositions législatives pour faire face aux problèmes majeurs
to tackle the main problems a hard Brexit would create, particularly on air and road links and citizens, plus fishing. Our commissioners have been to all capitals to discuss national preparations and emergency plans. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been a long haul, but we've got to look forward now. The clock is ticking not only for Brexit, but for other things too. We've got to deliver things for the European citizens. 321 legislative proposals have gone through Parliament and Council since we started in this commission. We've got to move forward. Tomorrow we'll be talking about our relations with China. We'll be talking about industrial policy.
and we'll be talking about our competitiveness. These are important, essential things for Europeans, and this is what our main job is.
Well, Brussels there, and we will go straight back to Brussels as soon as we have a statement from Theresa May. But while Theresa May was preparing for appearance in front of the EU27, Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer were there, also in Brussels, meeting Michel Barnier to discuss their alternative plans for Brexit.
Our determination is to prevent a no-deal exit from the European Union next Friday, and we're therefore looking for alternatives and building a majority in Parliament that can agree on a future constructive economic relationship with the European Union.
Well, last night we erroneously said we'd asked for an interview with one of Labour's frontbench team 3 nights in a row to no avail. Actually, it was just the 2 nights that we asked to speak to someone from their shadow frontbench. Tonight we're joined by Labour's leader in the House of Lords, Angela Smith. Angela Smith, first of all, your reaction to the news tonight of these 2 separate possibilities.
Well, I think it's been quite a long haul for them today, and I sense a frustration with Theresa May. And I think what's happened today, and I understand in the meeting she had with them, she was asked 3 times, what do you do if you can't get your meaningful vote 3 through the House of Commons? And there was no answer to that. So I think what they're trying to do now is give the opportunity to come up with an alternative plan. It doesn't seem that Theresa May can do that. It's going to have to be the House of Commons itself really take this over and find a consensus, if it's possible, within the MPs in the House of Commons.
Well, before we come on to that, just on that question do you think there was some long game plan by Theresa May to effect a softer Brexit by what happened today, or was it by accident rather than the design that that's a possibility?
Listening to Theresa May's language, particularly over the last couple of days, I don't think there's been any plan from Theresa May for a softer Brexit. Her mantra has been, it's my way, my deal or no deal. And given that she's having to win MPs over, the way she spoke last night and the way she attacked MPs and blamed MPs and took no responsibility herself, I don't think she's been trying to win MPs over to her deal.
You talked to Keir Starmer was there
Yes.
with Jeremy Corbyn. A sense of what they actually talked about with Barnier.
Well, I would imagine the kinds of things they're talking about are the things that we've been talking about for some time now. We want to be and have a customs union. We want to have the very strong alignment with the single market.
EU orchestrating the kind of Brexit that they want us to have.
Well, no, we've been saying this from day one.
No, but this is Barnier.
Yeah, but we've been putting it to them that we believe there's a majority for that in the House of Commons. Now, if they're accepting that, that is good news. They recognise that the House of Commons would choose a different kind of Brexit to the one being offered by Theresa May.
Of course,
Theresa May has been quite intransigent throughout.
I mean, there is a way of there is a way. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn has always said the last thing he wants is a no deal. He doesn't want a no deal. There's a very simple way to make sure he doesn't get a no deal. He could vote for this deal.
But this deal isn't good enough. And it's no good saying, we'll take something that's not good enough to prevent the worst outcome. I think what we'll see in the House of Commons this week is 2 things. Yeah. Firstly, MPs doing everything they can to not just say we don't want no deal, but rule out no deal.
But let's just talk through that.
Yeah.
The deal is that if she goes for meaningful vote, when she goes for meaningful vote 3, if that is not passed, then you start talking. What is the sequence that happens this week then?
Well, I think we're going to see MPs trying to take control of the agenda, possibly through the indicative vote process that Hilary Benn and others have pushed forward. But I find it very difficult to call this meaningful vote 3. A meaningful vote is one where the Prime Minister listens to what Parliament says. Twice she's said, I'm listening, but just brings the same thing back. She's not listening. And the legislation was only ever designed for only one meaningful vote.
Right, well, let's talk about this accord that apparently exists between Oliver Letwin and Jeremy Corbyn over something called Common Market 2.0, which is customs union and a form of single market. Has Jeremy Corbyn agreed that with Oliver Letwin?
I can't see if he's agreed it with Oliver Letwin. It's been under discussion, not just from Jeremy Corbyn and Oliver Letwin, but numerous MPs.
Yeah, but I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of the party, and he has prevaricated in the past over things like a second referendum, a people's vote. So I think people now kind of need clarity.
I can't answer what discussions they've had. What I would say is there's strong support in the House of Commons for that kind of approach, but also looking at things like environmental regulation, look at the way we operate on security. MPs want a different kind of package to the one offered by Theresa May. And I think that's been the most strongest thing to come out. And I think from the EU today, they're saying, give us a plan. What we want from you is a plan of how you're going to proceed.
Thank you very much indeed, Angela. Well, we've been reporting Tusk and Juncker have been doing press conferences. Nick Watt has been across it. Nick, tell me what you've been hearing from the press conferences. We saw a little flavour of it earlier.
Well, Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker, they've just finished their press conference, and if you look behind me, you may well be able to see the President of the European Council and the President of the European Commission wandering through the big press centre here. Jean-Claude Juncker always generally likes this moment. He likes to sort of josh with the journalists here. Last time this happened in December, he wore a green tie in support of Ireland, it was said, and I teased him about the tie, and he flipped it over and said, it's come from Tie Rack in London, therefore I'm a great fan of the UK. Now, interestingly, Donald Tusk, we shouldn't forget, former Polish Prime Minister, he talks quite emotionally about how sad he is that the UK is leaving the European Union. And in that press conference, he said, do you know what this does now? It delays the cliff edge. There's no cliff edge next week, so maybe the UK could vote for the Prime Minister's deal or find a softer Brexit. This is what he had to say.
In the first scenario, that is, if the withdrawal agreement is passed by the House of Commons next week, the European Council agrees to an extension until the 22nd of May. In the second scenario, that is, if the withdrawal agreement is not approved by the House of Commons next week, the European Council agrees to an extension until the 20th of April, 12th of April, while expecting the UK to indicate a way forward. What this means in practice is that until that date, all options will remain open, and the cliff edge date will be delayed.
So, Nick, what do you think this means for Theresa May?
Well, we will find out shortly. The Prime Minister is scheduled to have a press conference. There's going to be a little bit of a delay between the end of the Juncker press conference and the Prime Minister appearing. But I think what we might find from the Prime Minister is she's sticking to Plan A. She believes there is only one way to leave the European Union, and that is through her deal. And it was interesting that the session with her went on longer than expected, as I was saying 90 minutes earlier, and some exasperation when the leaders were saying, well, what's your Plan B? And she wouldn't say it's Plan A. She absolutely believes that's the only way. And what we will find out over the next week is if the Prime Minister is that attached to her plan, and if it fails, is she really going to go down the no Brexit route, or could she either entertain or find that Parliament very reluctantly takes her to a different sort of Brexit?
Well, thank you very much indeed, Nick. And to answer some of these questions, I am now joined by Chris Philp, Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party for Policy, and the Conservative Brexiteer MP, Peter Bone. Good evening to both of you. Well, big events tonight. First of all, Chris Philp, is she sticking to meaningful vote 3? There is no moving Theresa May. It's my way or the highway?
Well, I think she spent 2 years, or nearly 3 years now, painstakingly negotiating the deal with the European Union, which gets us out of the European Union while keeping trade flowing. It is the best option, despite its flaws, it's the best option available. So I'm not surprised she's sticking to it.
Is it the right plan to stick to it? Do you really think, after all this, this is going to get through? It's not. I don't think Peter Bone's going to vote for it.
I think it is the right thing to do, because if you consider the alternatives, they're all worse. The alternatives would include this common market 2.0 thing we're hearing about, so following all the rules, paying the money, but having no say, not leaving the European Union at all, well, that would dishonour the referendum result, or having an exit which isn't as orderly as it could be. So none of those options are better than the deal that's on the table.
So despite, obviously, the EU's intentions to try and make sure no deal's off the table, what essentially you are saying tonight is that you would rather have a no deal than another deal. It's either her deal or no deal. You think that should be the case?
Well, I voted, I think like Peter, a couple of weeks ago, to leave a no-deal exit on the table, because in any negotiation you must always have the right to walk away, and I stand by that vote. But I would prefer to leave with a deal that's on the table, because it keeps trade flowing and it organises our exit in an orderly fashion. It protects jobs, it keeps trade flowing, it gives us a year and 3 quarters more.
I'd like to say
to
that
agree
these
our future
arguments,
trade
that may well be a very good argument, and it is your argument. How many times has that argument been put? And that argument has been rejected, and Europe is giving her another chance, isn't it?
Well, I mean, the House of Commons has rejected a whole number of things. The House of Commons rejected by an even bigger majority the idea of a second referendum. We've rejected a customs union. We've rejected a no-deal exit. The House of Commons has rejected pretty much everything that's been put before it. So what we need to do as Parliament, frankly, next week, is decide what we are going to do.
So let's say the meaningful vote 3 doesn't get through, and we have alternatives put together through, indicative votes. We may have this common market to the Oliver Letwin and apparently Jeremy Corbyn are putting together. We may have Parliament taking control maybe on Wednesday, we don't know what day, and another deal comes up that people can coalesce around, the kind of thing that Philip Hammond was talking about. Wouldn't you rather have that than crashing out with all the things that Ben Chu was saying there about all the problems that might contain?
Well, look, you mentioned the Common Market 2.0, or what Nick Bowles has called Norway Plus in the past. Just to be clear what that involves. It involves full single market membership, so following all the rules. It involves customs union membership, so we have to follow all of the trade deals the European Union do with no say over them, and we're prevented from doing our own free trade deals. Hang on, it gets worse. We have to pay the money still, and there's unlimited free movement, but we have no say at all. So I don't think this Common Market 2.0 idea is a runner at all.
Well, just very briefly, finally to you before I turn to Peter. If Theresa May fails to get meaningful vote 3 through, should she step aside from the negotiations and let someone else take the lead?
No, well, you're entertaining these very hypothetical scenarios, and I think that the fact all of these hypotheticals you're putting are pretty unappealing, just to me illustrates the importance of Parliament coming together and supporting the deal as negotiated.
Peter Bowen, what do you make of what's just happened in Brussels?
Well, I'm not sure I understand whether Theresa May has accepted that offer, because I don't think she was in the room, so I'm not sure of that.
So do you mean she might not want the offer?
She might want the bit about going to the 22nd of May and have a second vote. I'm not sure about an extension to the unconditional extension to April the 12th. I mean, 2/3 of Conservative MPs voted against any extension past the 29th of March. I mean, Chris might have even voted, I think Chris voted for that as well.
I did.
So 2/3 say we mustn't go past the 29th of March. She's saying, well, look, if you agree with my deal, I think we should go to the 22nd of May for the technical reason. But there's no authority for the unconditional.
Let's say she agrees to the EU's terms, and you've got me. Are you more likely to vote for meaningful vote 3 or less likely? Because the possibility now is if you don't vote for it, it doesn't get through, you'll get a softer Brexit. You're not going to get a harder Brexit, are you? You'll get a softer Brexit.
Well, if a deal is a bad deal, it's a bad deal, and I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to vote for something on what might happen. I'm going to vote what's before me, and it is a bad deal, and I'm not going to support a bad deal.
So you're not going to support a bad deal, and so therefore you won't support another deal either. You just want no deal.
No, actually, what I want to see is the Prime Minister say... Well,
haven't you been checkmated tonight?
No, absolutely not. What I hope happens, and I hope we honour what 17 million people voted for, which is to come out of the EU by the 29th of March.
But we now kind of know that's not going to happen.
Well, you know, we're talking about hypotheticals, but what I think might happen is that Theresa May say, well, she'll put the vote, and if she loses the vote, I think she'll go back and say, look, I've tried. What the way forward now is for us to come out on the 29th of March on a managed no-deal basis. The EU has already said privately that they will give us a 9-month standstill.
So you think the country would rather, with the possibility of another kind of Brexit, they would rather go out on a no deal if they can't get Theresa May's deal through? You think that's what the country wants?
Yes,
to come out
I think that's what the country.
8 days then?
I think yes, in 8 days. I think that's what the country wants. I don't think that's what the Remainer Parliament wants, but I absolutely think that's what the country wants.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's look at the front pages, and of course this is news just hit tonight, too late for the latest editions, but we start with the Daily Mail, and they're saying May calls EU's bluff on no deal. She warns I'm ready to crash out. 80 ministers threaten we'll quit. Army set up headquarters in a nuclear bunker. The Financial Times, May faces national emergency as EU haggles over Brexit. Guillotine, TUC and CBI unite in a stark warning. Brussels summit takes control of the timetable. And of course, The Guardian, May's appeal falls flat as the EU seizes control of the Brexit debate. We now know that there is a decision, a unanimous decision about the EU27, about the two different options they have offered Theresa May. And of course, we'll have more on papers tomorrow, but right now they're just about an hour out of date. And I'm joined by Sir Simon Fraser, former Permanent Secretary at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and Sam Lister from the Daily Express to talk through some of the comment pieces. But first of all, tonight, Simon Fraser, your analysis of where Britain stands tonight.
Well, I think it's been a very interesting and important night, and what we've learnt two things tonight. First, that the EU no longer really has confidence that Theresa May's deal is going to go through, and secondly, they really don't want a no deal. And so, sort of an outbreak of grown-up politics, they've taken a rational choice to give us an option, and they've put the ball back in our court. So what happens next week is going to be very interesting.
But you heard Peter Bones saying, you know, as far as he's concerned, it's 29th of March. She hasn't agreed to this yet, but of course, the chances are, of course, I think, will she agree to this? Will she agree to what she's being offered by Europe?
I think as it stands, she has to, but the ERG is showing no sign whatsoever of softening on this. So really, where does this leave us? In Theresa May's words, I don't want to make your view as grown, but nothing has changed. You know, the ERG is still implacably opposed to the deal as it stands.
And so what do you think is the most likely sequence of events next week?
It's very difficult to say. A lot of it depends on Speaker Bercow, and we've seen how he has reacted in the last week or two. He's asserted his authority in quite an interesting fashion, and taking control of the process himself, really. So we have to see what happens there.
You've been in a lot of European negotiations. Do you think the EU played quite a clever game tonight, or do you think Theresa May is the one that got ultimately what she wanted?
Well, I think the EU have been quite clever, because if they've decided the deal's not going through, they have avoided the end of March cliff edge, provided, of course, that we pass the necessary legislation to stop it happening. And they've said to Theresa May, OK, have another go. But if she doesn't have another go, if she doesn't get it through when she has another go, they've left the option for something else to happen here. So I think they've been quite smart.
But you heard Chris Phillips saying that if she doesn't get it through, she'll go again. She's not minded to actually alter in any way the coordinates of this deal.
No, I don't think she is minded, but I think we have to ask ourselves the question, if she fails 3 times, how many times are people going to allow her to keep bringing it back and failing?
But, as you say, it depends on John Bercow, but it depends on a number of things. It depends on what Oliver Letwin and Jeremy Corbyn do. It depends on this idea of indicative votes and the sequencing of that as well. I mean, presumably what happens is she has to go for the meaningful vote, and that has to be rejected, and then the other things kick in.
Yeah. Because the default position at the moment is that we leave on March the 29th, and you need secondary legislation to change that. But because there's a 2-date option here, you have to find a process of working out which date it's going to be. So
let's ask about Theresa May herself. I mean, tonight, a grilling of 90 minutes and then waiting this excruciating long wait to find out what was actually going to happen. If her meaningful vote fails next week, and there is some kind of cross-party consensus, as I was saying earlier, what Philip Hammond has been talking about before. What is the mechanism? Can she be the one that does not lead that negotiation? Would she be asked, do you think, by her cabinet to step aside from this negotiation and let somebody else, Philip Hammond, Amber Rudd, whatever, to take hold of the negotiations? I mean, it's hard to see how she could suddenly pivot to start talking to the people that she has so steadfastly not really been talking to.
I think the speech she made last night about who was to blame, really, the blame game speech, as it's become known, has really caused major problems, because it's set in train a whole sequence of events, and it's caused a real lack of trust.
We're just going to go straight over. Theresa May is speaking now in Brussels.
Good morning. I've just met with Donald Tusk following the EU Council's discussion on the UK's request for the approval of the Strasbourg supplementary documents and for a short extension to the Article 50 process. Firstly, I welcome the Council's approval of the legally binding assurances in relation to the Northern Ireland backstop, which I negotiated with President Juncker last week. This should give extra assurance to Parliament that in the unlikely event the backstop is ever used, it will only be temporary, and that the UK and the EU will begin work immediately to replace the backstop with alternative arrangements by the end of December 2020. After a lengthy discussion, the Council today also agreed, subject to a successful vote next week, that in order to provide time for the UK Parliament to agree and ratify a Brexit deal, the date of our departure will now be extended to the 22nd of May. If Parliament does not agree a deal next week, the EU Council will extend Article 50 until the 12th of April. At this point, we would either leave with no deal or put forward an alternative plan. If this involved a further extension, it would mean participation in the European parliamentary elections. As I've said previously, I believe strongly that it would be wrong to ask people in the UK to participate in these elections 3 years after voting to leave the EU. What the decision today underlines is the importance of the House of Commons passing a Brexit deal next week so that we can bring an end to the uncertainty and leave in a smooth and orderly manner. Tomorrow morning, I will be returning to the UK and working hard to build support for getting the deal through. I know MPs on all sides of the debate have passionate views, and I respect those different positions. Last night, I expressed my frustration, and I know that MPs are frustrated too. They have difficult jobs to do. I hope we can all agree we are now at the moment of decision, and I will make every effort to ensure that we are able to leave with a deal and move our country forward. Thank you. Laura.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. BBC News. Doesn't this delay just postpone the dilemma you still find yourself in? What is it that makes you think you have a chance of passing your vote next week? And can you confirm you will definitely hold the third meaningful vote next week? And I know you've expressed what appears to be some regret from how the remarks you made last night about MPs. Do you think actually you should apologise for the remarks you made about what Parliament has done?
Well, first of all, as I said, in relation to members of Parliament, there are passionately held views on all sides of this argument. And yes, as I said last night, I expressed frustration, but I know MPs are frustrated too. And I'm very grateful to those MPs who have supported the deal, to those who've come round to supporting the deal, having not previously done so, and to all those MPs that I've been meeting across the House and talking to about the issues that they are concerned about in relation to this deal. But I think what this decision tonight does is show the clear choice that is available, open to MPs. Getting the deal through next week in a meaningful vote means that we can have that extension to the 22nd of May, get our legislation through, deliver on the referendum, leave the European Union and do it in an orderly manner. Not getting that vote through means that we will, obviously, as the Council has said, come back to the Council before the 12th of April with a plan for the way forward. But that, if it involves that further extension, would mean us candidates being stood in the European parliamentary elections. I think the choice is clear for people. James.
Theresa May speaking there live in Brussels, and you can continue watching on the news channel.
We know that your first choice is deal, but to help us understand your thinking, could you now rank in order of preference those other three choices? Is no deal your second choice?
I am working to ensure that we can leave the European Union with a deal. You mentioned a fourth choice of revoking Article 50. I do not believe that we should be revoking Article 50. That is not something we should be doing. For this reason, we gave the choice as to whether to stay in the European Union or leave the European Union to the British people. They voted in 2016. They voted to leave. Government at the time said we would honour and respect the decision. At the last general election, 80% of the votes were cast for members of Parliament who stood on a manifesto to honour that decision, respect the referendum. I think the time is now to deliver for the British people. The time is now to make the decision. Faisal.
Thanks, Prime Minister. Sky News. Can you confirm what will happen if your deal, I know you want it to pass, but just say it doesn't, if the deal
I'm glad you got the message.
If the deal doesn't pass next week, that you will bring forward the SI that would change the date to the 12th of April, and will you therefore also hold the promised sequence of indicative votes so a different plan from the House of Commons will come about or be revealed?
Well, I stand by the commitments that we've made, both in terms of the legislative commitment for a motion for the House of Commons and obviously the commitments that the Chancellor Duchy of Lancaster has made in the House of Commons. The decision that's been taken by the European Union Council, and obviously to which we have agreed, does mean that there is now that different date of the 12th of April. I believe this is important. It gives us the opportunity, MPs next week, to look at the choices that clearly face them. We can leave with a deal in an orderly manner, have that extension to the 22nd of May, or if we don't get that deal through, if we don't get that vote through, then before the 12th of April we have to come forward with another plan, and if that plan means a further extension, it means standing in those European parliamentary elections. Tom.
Thank you, Prime Minister. You said to the House of Commons on Wednesday that if your deal is not passed, and I quote, the House will have to decide how to proceed. Can you confirm if the House decides to proceed with a long delay or a softer Brexit or a customs union, you will then enact that?
I was very clear that we need to work with the House to decide how to proceed if we don't get the deal through this week. But I think what tonight's decision from the Council has done is very clearly frame for people the choices that will be available to them. I continue to believe that the best route for the United Kingdom is to honour the referendum result, to leave the European Union, to do it in an orderly manner. That means to do it with a deal. The deal is there. The option is there for members of Parliament. I believe it's important that we do see that vote going through and that we are able to leave in that orderly way. Jason.
Thank you. Jason Groves from the Daily Mail. Are we ever going to leave the EU, Prime Minister? We've got a whole load of new dates here. Yesterday you seemed to be suggesting you wouldn't ever sanction a longer delay. Now you're talking about it again. Will you ever sanction a longer delay? Or is that a red line for you? Is this it? Are these the last dates we're ever going to see about Brexit?
The answer to your first question is yes, we will be leaving the European Union, and I absolutely fervently believe that it is the duty of Parliament to deliver on that result of the referendum. I also believe that it is better for the UK if we can do that with a negotiated deal, do that in an orderly, smooth and orderly manner. That's what tonight's decision from the Council enables us to do. But I think it is important that we recognise, and I hope all MPs would agree with me, that we are now at that moment of decision. Now, I'll take a couple of more. Is Andy here from PA? Yes.
Andy Woodcock from PA, the Press Association. Prime Minister, there's a petition on the parliamentary website that has now gained more than 2 million signatures asking you to revoke Article 50. Are you confident that it is still the will of the British people to leave the European Union, or do you think there's any chance that opinion has shifted since 2016?
Well, if you look back to what happened in the referendum, we saw the biggest democratic exercise in our history. We saw many people who'd either never voted before or not voted for many years turning out to vote in that referendum. And there was a clear result that we should leave the European Union. And I think that it's important, if we want to show that we can be trusted as politicians, to respect a decision that we gave to the people. We didn't say, tell us what you think and we'll think about it. We said, here's the vote. What is your decision, and we will deliver on it. And I believe it is our duty as a government, as a parliament, to deliver on that vote. And now the final question I'll take, is there somebody here from Deutsche Welle? Yes, sorry, yes.
Deutsche Welle, German broadcaster. Prime Minister, you put some of the blame about the situation that the UK is in on the House of Commons yesterday. Do you put some of the blame on yourself as well? And would you do things differently, especially dealing with the EU, given the fact that today, again, you did not get what you wanted because you wanted an extension until the 30th of June, and that's not what you got?
Well, throughout these negotiations, of course, they've been tough. Both sides have had their interests. They've been promoting their interests. I believe any negotiation involves a degree of compromise. I believe that we have got a good deal on the table. That's why I continue to promote that deal. And also, if we look at what has happened tonight, there was always a tension in terms of the dates between the various legal risks around the European parliamentary elections. And I recognise that that was there. But I believe what we now have in terms of the Council's decision is a very clear framework within which MPs can operate. They know what the choices are. I believe now is the moment of decision. If we get a vote through this week, we can leave on the 22nd of May with that deal ratified. If we don't get a vote through next week, we will have to propose a different way forward to the European Union. And if that involves an extension, then they would say that we should hold those European parliamentary elections. I don't believe it's right to be in a situation of holding European parliamentary elections 3 years on from people having voted to leave the EU. I think they would rightly question why it was that they were then being asked to elect people to an organisation, part of an organisation that they had already voted to leave. Thank you.
Theresa May there taking questions and giving a statement after the EU summit concluded. She also reiterated that the new day for us leaving the European Union will be the 22nd of May if the withdrawal agreement gets signed off by Parliament next week. If it doesn't, then the UK government has until the 12th of April to decide what happens next. And in that press conference, Theresa May again refusing to answer questions about what she would prefer to happen if she can't get her deal through Parliament. She would only say that she doesn't think it would be right to revoke Article 50 and to stay in the EU. She also seemed to express some regret for her speech yesterday, which certainly irritated many MPs who she might have hoped would back her deal as well, simply saying that she was expressing her frustration and she understands why some MPs are frustrated as well. Well, to guide us through the significance of this evening's summit, we're joined now by our Europe correspondent, Mark Stone. I mean, there's been several twists and turns this evening. Where do you think we've ended up?
Yeah, well, just to comment on something Theresa May said there, because I think there were two distinct and very important points that she made. The first one seemed to be an admission that this is it with the meaningful vote, number 4 this coming week. But then she was quite clear to Faisal Islam, our political editor, that if her vote doesn't get passed, then the UK must come forward with another plan before April the 12th, which seemed to me to be a concession of sorts from her, that it is then up to them, to the UK government and Parliament to come up with something different. The other point which you alluded to there was a remarkable and extraordinary change of tone from her tonight compared to last night to MPs, where she admitted, as her Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt did this morning, that she is frustrated, and that is perhaps why she chose the tone she did last night in Downing Street, which angered, as we saw today, so many MPs and will have alienated many who might have been considering voting for her deal. So a screeching U-turn there by Theresa May in trying to appeal back to those MPs who she needs to get that deal over the line. In terms more broadly of the summit today, well, it was quite clear from the change from this morning to this afternoon that when the leaders arrived this morning, many hours ago now, I don't think it had sunk into their heads the fact that the likelihood of her deal going through next week is small. They seem to think that perhaps it was still going to happen. Maybe they hadn't really read the British newspapers as much as they do. It became clear through the course of the day, as we predicted, in fact, this morning, that they would have to consider the hypothetical, which is that she doesn't win next week. And what does that mean? Well, it meant that they had to consider a longer extension or a different extension, and that is precisely what they have done. Donald Tusk making quite clear that no, she can't have the extension she wanted, which was to the end of June. She can have a shorter extension, but it is dependent on her deal going through next week, or is it? And I'll come on to that in a second. And the other thing is that if her deal doesn't go through, then by April the 12th, the cut-off, that is an important date because that's the date that the UK has to say it's going to stand in the European elections. Then there can be a longer extension, but that is dependent on us standing in the European elections. I say next week that there is a suggestion. We just had a briefing from an EU official after Donald Tusk and Jean-Claude Juncker did their news conference, and he seemed to suggest that it might not have to be next week. If her vote doesn't pass next week and it passes the week after, then there is still a chance that would be okay and that we could have an extension till May. So that I think is interesting. She was quite clear it has to be next week, but maybe it could be the week after. But yeah, I mean, to sum it up, they've kicked the can down the road yet again, and I think there was a lot of laughing and joking in the news conference. Jean-Claude Juncker was asked, how long is a long extension? He paused for what seemed like a very long time and then said, until the very end. I mean, I think there will be a lot of people who are thinking, my goodness, we've just kicked the can down the road. The uncertainty will continue for longer still.
And as Donald Tusk said, we still have all options on the table, from revoking Article 50 right through to leaving with no deal. I had a very interesting conversation as well with Philippe Lambert, the MEP and the member of the Brexit Steering Committee, before the Theresa May Brexit conference started. He suggested that this delay was all about trying to empower the British Parliament to take control of things rather than the Prime Minister, effectively bypassing the government, if you like. Is that your reading?
Well, I think it dawned on the leaders today that they think she's serious about no deal. They've wondered, as we have, whether ultimately she's bluffing and that she won't accept no deal as an option. But as one official said to me, if I can find the right bit in my notes, I'm not sure I can actually.
Yeah, you have to summarise for us.
Yeah, well, no, one official basically said that she, for the first time, they realised that she didn't seem to fear no deal at all. She was quite happy for no deal to happen. So at that point, I think they realised they almost had to take back control.
And is that because they fear no deal?
Yeah, of course they do. Absolutely they do. I mean, they are more prepared than they have ever been. And some countries, the Netherlands, which is clearly would be very affected by no deal, has got extremely advanced no deal preparations. But they still know that no deal would damage them massively, and so they are very worried about that, and so that was, I guess, was a point today where they thought we've got to somehow take back control of that, and they've moved the goalposts. I think they've conceded quite a lot today, the EU side, and there was another question about, you know, you remember talking just yesterday, the day before, they said that a longer extension was dependent on the UK coming up with a specific plan. Well, now they're saying a longer extension is simply dependent on the UK agreeing to take part in European elections, which is, I think somewhat different. But yeah, I mean, as I say, the can's been kicked down the road again.